And good afternoon, everybody. It's time for the show. Let's be reasonable. My name is Art Shedd. I'm your host. And, today we're going to talk a little bit about two interviews I had a chance to watch over the weekend. I watched the Donald Trump and Dr. Phil interview, and I also watched Joe Biden and Howard Stern's interview. And for the most part, folks, I got to tell you, I walked away with, well, I guess you would say between the two interviews, I did like the Howard Stern Joe Biden interview more. I would say I walked away from that one pretty upbeat. Like, that guy's not that bad. The Donald Trump interview with Dr. Phil, you know, not saying it was a bad interview because there were things that Dr. Phil brought up during the interview that I appreciated, right? He talked about the black letter laws, of which I had to look up, right? So anything that requires or that will compel me to do some research, I like that. He talked also about the overlay. There's these Chinese companies who are buying land, and they seem to be buying it around U.S. installations. So I thought that was interesting too, and wanted to kind of find out more about it. Not saying that I haven't heard about this because I have, but I just didn't connect the dots as to where they were putting these bases, or sorry, where the Chinese were putting their money in relation to the United States bases or military installations around the country. Very interesting. So I put that on my list of things to kind of look into as well. Worth it. So the interview on balance, and I'm speaking about the Trump Dr. Phil interview, it was more of the same, I thought. It was more of the same about Trump feeling that the jury's rigged, the judge conflicted. Um, the interview was, you know, really, I would or could have been better from the standpoint if you could have um, had a conversation, I think, about anything other than that. I think the American people are, you might say, tired of this conversation, or at least I'm tired of hearing it. Okay. If you don't like what the jury, the verdict that they uh, gave you, my advice is to stay off the radar. So, but that's just me. So, and I'm trying, like I said, I'm trying to be reasonable. What did I like about the Howard Stern interview? I mean, from the beginning until the end, I was captivated by the interview. And by the way, the Trump interview was an hour. The Biden interview was also an hour. After the Trump interview, they had a panel of four people, and you could tell. I mean, Dr. Phil tried to tell me that he wasn't really cheerleading one side or another, but it was crystal clear that the panel, if Dr. Phil wasn't cheerleading Donald Trump, the panel surely was cheerleading Donald Trump. So, that being the case, it seemed more that it was geared around a right wing audience. But, you got to remember that Dr. Phil is a daytime media guy, right? So, the people that watch the show probably aren't that Republican friendly. Anyway, I digress. So the interview was really, I wish I could have learned a little bit more about Donald Trump. However, I didn't. Even when Dr. Phil was looking to get Donald Trump to coalesce around some new ideas, like why go for the retribution? Let your your I guess you could say your policies and your agenda be the retribution as opposed to putting people in jail and all the rest of it. But, Donald Trump's going to do what Donald Trump's going to do. Now, by contrast, the Howard Stern interview, I got to tell you, I was kind of hooked from the word go. They came in with some Bruce Springsteen. I like Bruce Springsteen. They started talking about Joe Biden and his relationship with his dad. Talked about Joe Biden playing football. I didn't know Joe Biden was a safety. I didn't know he was an athlete. Talked about Joe Biden hitting some kid in the nose and busting his nose at age 14. talked about a number of different things that really dealt with character. So there were character issues that were on display when you looked at the relationship between Donald Trump, or sorry, between Howard Stern and Joe Biden. You didn't get that with Dr. Phil and Donald Trump. It was really about, you know, in my estimation, and I could be wrong. Remember, um, I'm not here to tell you that people don't have biases, because we do. I do have a bias, right? So I'm not here to dissuade anyone from having a bias. I just try to be reasonable in even with my bias. Okay. So, and I applaud people who can do that uh, in your life as well. So that being the case, given my bias, right, I saw an interview with Howard Stern and Joe Biden that was wholesome, folksy, and about character. The interview I saw with Donald Trump and Dr. Phil was like trying to control a bull in a china shop, right? Trump had a message that he wants to get across, and that he's just going to keep repeating it. And he keeps repeating the same thing over and over again. I mean, I think anybody who listened long enough, you could start filling in the blanks as he starts talking as to what he's going to say. The judge is conflicted. The jury, they should have never brought the case. There were plenty of people who said that you should never bring the case. And he'll cite, some TV names and some names that sound familiar. And all in all, guess what? That's maybe two or three or four attorneys or lawyers or judges or whoever the hell they may be, but that's not everybody. So it's my estimation. If you want to stay out of trouble, stay off the radar, right? So with regard to the boxes down in Florida, they're not your boxes to begin with. So don't lie on an affidavit saying you don't have them. It's that simple. When it comes to January 6th, I mean, yeah, you did tell these people to meet them in on January 6th. It's going to be wild. So there's some evidence there that you have to look at and say, well, you know what? In a lot of the respects, I think Donald Trump brings a lot of this stuff on himself. That's just my opinion. You may disagree. And if you do disagree, tell me in the comments. You know what? For the most part, I'm going to tell you, I don't mind people disagreeing with me. And the reason why I say that is because I have the opportunity to learn something through the disagreement, right? You have also the opportunity to learn something as well when we disagree. Disagreeing doesn't mean that we have to come to fisticuffs and we have to resort to name calling and all the rest of the ridicule. All that, no. There are, I think, good people who can honestly disagree on topics. And that's okay. Like I said, we can learn something. Now, back to Howard Stern and Joe Biden. Um, Talked about Joe Biden, hitting the guy in the nose. Talked about Joe Biden, his first wife. Great story. I never heard that story before. It was a great story. Talked about his second wife. A great story. Talked about his boys, Bo and Hunter. Uh, just, I mean, the whole interview from front to end, or to beginning to end, I mean, really was a great interview. Dr. Phil, Donald Trump, good interview, not a problem with it, right? But you just, after a while, you just knew where it was headed. So, all in all, here's what I'm going to say. If the race is going to be decided um, in November, I would rather that race be decided based on character. So the interviews that are out there where I can see the character of the person is what I'm looking for. And I saw more with Joe Biden's character than I've seen and appreciate Joe Biden's character than I have seen and appreciate for Donald Trump. Just my bias. That's just how I feel. Uh, uh, Look, I could look at the numbers when it comes to the economy. I can look at, and there's some really good numbers. Job growth has been phenomenal over the past 4 years. It just has. The inflationary numbers aren't great, but I'm here to tell you. I mean, Trump left office throwing, well, about $8 trillion on the U.S. credit card, so to speak, right? Biden gets elected and he throws what, $4 or $5 trillion on the U.S. credit card. Now, anybody in their right mind, I don't care who you are, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, if you put 14, 15 trillion on the US credit card, that's going to show up as inflation. Now, for one guy, he put it on thinking that he was going to get reelected. And it would have been interesting to see how he would have managed the economy. I don't think there's a really pleasant way to manage 9% inflation. Just isn't. And I guess he could have blamed it on Nancy Pelosi. But remember, he wanted the American people to have these checks. And he was proud to Donald Trump, that is, sign his name to these checks. But issuing those checks without any type of cuts anywhere or whatever, guess what? That's inflationary. That's just throwing money onto the national debt. So that's what we did. So you can't say that, you know, Joe Biden is responsible for inflation. That's hogwash. Anybody in the right mind, you got to look at this and say they're both responsible for the inflation. Joe Biden has just been dealt a hand in order, to how to deal with it. And I got to tell you, I don't see, here's the thing with the people who are up around Washington today. Now, this is the same group with some deviation, just a little bit. Same group of Republicans, neocons, and the like, along with the same liberal Democrats who are there and the conservative Democrats, right? Who they all march to the same beat. Okay. So, how they unwind the inflation was still, in my estimation, still going to end up in the same place because the same group thought in Washington um, is present, is persistent. It hasn't changed. And there's not enough of anything different that would make it any different. So the inflation's just going to be there. We did have infrastructure, right? Infrastructure, I don't know how many infrastructure weeks that we were going to have during the Trump administration, or we did have during the Trump administration, but there were many. Never got it across the finish line. The only signature piece of legislation that Trump has, can say that he's responsible for is the tax cut. And remember, it wasn't paid for. I mean, the whole thought was that it would grow the economy, so that would pay for it. Well, that never really happened. And in fact, folks, if you look at it, inflation started to tick up during the Trump administration. Think about that. So, anyway, when you really start looking at all of these different things, I know there are issues, right? I know there are issues with inflation. I know there are issues with the border. I know that when you look at Biden versus Trump, you have a guy in Biden who is going to follow that mantra that we've seen over the past 40 years. And the fixes that they're going to employ will be incremental fixes. All right. So you have that in contrast with Donald Trump's fixes, which is, you might say, for the most part, just blow up the entire island. Right. And I got to tell you, if I had to choose one or the other, I would take the incremental over blowing up the entire island. Because to me, when you blow up the entire piece, I mean, you're blowing up the economy, you're blowing up the dollar, you're blowing up everything that I think truly matters. And for anybody who sits around and thinks that it won't affect Social Security, Medicare, think again. And if you think that you know it won't affect liquidity and all these other things that the Great Recession taught you, think again. Okay, so all of these things, folks, and I'm here to tell you. I'm on a soapbox at this point now. I will be getting off of it really, really quick, but I'm here to tell you that everything, or let me start by saying it this way, I get it. I don't care if you're on the left or on the right. You're both running around screaming, your hair's on fire, your hair's on fire. I get it. The reason why your hair is on fire. And what do I mean by that? You got Democrats that say, well, if you don't elect Biden, this will be the end of democracy, right? And then you have the other group with their hair on fire. If you don't elect Trump, uh, the the country is in bad shape, and it's going to go under. They're saying similar things, but the reality is this: the reason why the company is in the shape that it's in is because you got 40 years of supply side economics that, for the most part, folks, hasn't been beneficial to the American people. It's been beneficial to people with money, but it hasn't been beneficial to the American people. I mean, some classic stuff, in my estimation, came out of 2008 and 9, right? They needed a bailout. Businesses, banks needed a bailout, right? Hank Paulson, Republican, right? On bended knee, trying to get Nancy Pelosi to wrangle in these Republicans and pass the TARP, Troubled Asset Recovery Program, right? But it was Hank Paulson and Goldman Sachs and Lehman Brothers and all of these other companies that developed the credit default swaps and the CDOs and the rest of it that blew up the economy in the first place. Republicans. Okay. I'm here to tell you. If you look back over 40 years of Republican supply side economics brought to you by the neocons, of which I'm here to tell you, Donald Trump is not a neocon. He's not. Donald Trump is out on his own little island and MAGA is with him, right? But they're not neocons. And that's why I say, the neocon plan is supply side economics. The Democrat plan probably has, and I hate to say it this way, it probably has more to do with taxing, right? And rest assured, there's some other Democrat notions of price controls and some other things that are out there too. Don't be naive to think that it's not, because it is, because that was what you saw during the time in which, between the 1930s up until the 1980s, right? That when Democrats were in control and running things, that's what you kind of had. You had some price controls, and you had taxes, higher taxes. It's a fact. Look it up. But anyway, you'll see that Donald Trump is not a neocon. I think he's more, I can tell you, he's more on the left side of this than he is on the right when it comes to political, I guess you would say, theory and economic theory, right? He's closer to the left than he is the right. And it's really interesting to me to see the MAGA crowd and all the neocons that are there that are coalescing around Donald Trump in this notion, because it's really, it's really interesting. Anyway, my point is this, folks. If I had to choose between the two interviews, obviously I like the Stern interview versus the Phil interview, Dr. Phil interview. I would choose Joe Biden over Donald Trump in 2024, the election. The economy is better. I got so many other metrics I can look at and say, yes, empirically it's better. I do understand, like I said, I get it from the American. Look, even though the economy is better, it doesn't mean that people aren't hurting, because they are. Right? But at the end of the day, I think there's a little bit more upside with Joe Biden than there is with Donald Trump. Donald Trump seems to be more grievance based. Joe Biden appears to be more policy based. Now, and people can say, oh, well, he weaponized the Justice Department. That's hogwash. It really is. It's just a good talking point. But you can't prove that. You had David Weiss get a conviction on Hunter Biden a couple weeks ago. So that's hogwash. Anybody tell you that bullshit, they're lying to you. So anyway, look, my point is this. I think the race comes down to In my world, this race comes down to character. And you have a handful of states, what, 6 or 7 states that make up, uh, wow, an electorate. The race is probably going to come down to less than 100,000 votes spread out across 6 or 7 states. But I believe that character matters more. That doesn't mean that there isn't some form of, I'm not going to call it the deep state, but I will say Washington think tank, Washington deep thought, whatever it is that's up there. There's a certain type of thinking there that's not thinking around what the American people need or want. It's really based on what they need. But the race comes down to character. And I believe at the end of the day, it will be character that gets Joe Biden across the finish line in November. Now, all that being said, I don't have any axe to grind with Donald Trump. In fact, Donald Trump has a birthday June the 14th. My birthday is June the 18th. So I'm here to tell you, hey, happy birthday, Donald Trump. I guess when it comes down to, you remember the old beer test? If the guy that you could sit down and have a beer with, I think I could have a beer with Joe Biden. Although Joe Biden doesn't drink. Okay, there's that. But if Donald Trump wanted to call me up and say, hey, all right, let's go grab a beer. I'm in Indianapolis. Grab a beer with me. Sure, why not? I listen to what you got to say. I may agree with some of it. I may disagree with a lot of it. But at the end of the day, if we can have a conversation, that'd be great. I'm not opposed to talking to people who disagree with me, or I hope they wouldn't be opposed to talking to me. So that being said, folks, look, I'd say go out and watch the videos. They're actually pretty good. And I didn't mention it, but I also saw a little bit more of Donald Trump's character, or what I would think people like about Donald Trump. Not in the Dr. Phil interview. It was with the Logan Paul interview. So if that one's out there too, take a look at that. And tell me what your thoughts are. At the end of the day, folks, I'd like for you to like and subscribe and give me your comments on the other side. This is our shit. Hope you enjoyed the show. Look forward to doing this again pretty soon. Bye.